In the impenetrable silence of an early morning in the year 1623, a heartbreaking wail pierced the marble walls of the Topkapi Palace. It was not the groan of a war wound, nor the cry of a captured enemy. It was the screams of a maiden, barely 15 years old, Princess Fatma Sultan, daughter of the most powerful sovereign on earth. Her voice shook the corridors as if they were blades of ice, and even the eunuchs guarding the doors stepped back in terror, not daring to interrupt that forbidden moment. What happened that night was not a simple domestic misfortune, but the revelation of the hidden price every sultan's daughter had to pay, a price engraved in flesh and soul, which official history tried to silence for 600 years. Those screams were not born of physical wounds, but of a secret ritual that broke the spirit before breaking the body, condemning the princesses to an existence of shadows before they even reached womanhood. For over 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire maintained a protocol of marriage preparation so sinister that not even the fiercest enemies of the throne would have wished it upon their own daughters. It was a system carefully erased from the chronicles, hidden behind tapestries and golden walls, and only rediscovered centuries later thanks to documents found in the secret archives of Istanbul in the year 2019. Millions of souls around the world, from peasant girls to ladies of the court, dreamed of the fortune of living like Ottoman princesses, surrounded by silk, jewels, and obedience. But behind those gleaming walls lived not luxury, but a nightmare so refined that it drove many of these young women to wish for death rather than the marital bed. And now, in this narrative, you, like me, will witness the hidden truth that remained locked away for 6 centuries. Prepare yourselves, for what you are about to discover is not a fairy tale, but a tale of horror carefully disguised as an imperial ceremony. Before proceeding, I ask you something. If this story has already made your heart shudder, show your interest, subscribe, and leave in the comments the name of the queen or princess whose dark fate you wish us to reveal in the coming days. Whether it be Marie Antoinette, Cleopatra, or Anne Boleyn, your voice will choose the next secret that time tried to bury. Now come with me and discover why so many Ottoman princesses, born in palaces of gold, preferred the cold embrace of the grave to the fate of their weddings. The Ottoman Empire, vast as a shoreless ocean, cast its shadow for over 6 centuries, from the year 1299 to 1922. It was an empire that tamed 3 continents, where the roar of its armies echoed from the walls of Vienna to the burning sands of Yemen. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, that city transformed into the beating heart of Ottoman power, renamed Istanbul, and the Topkapi Palace stood as its most resplendent jewel. There, among golden walls and perfumed courtyards, the fates of kingdoms and souls were decided. In those secret chambers, hidden behind latticework and endless corridors, the imperial harem became a parallel world inhabited by over 800 women during its times of greatest splendor. It was a closed universe, woven with threads of silk and power, where every breath was watched, and every gesture could mean promotion or condemnation. From 1530, when Suleiman the Magnificent conferred the title of Haseki Sultan upon his wife Hurrem, the harem was not just a space for pleasure, but a stage for intrigue, alliances, and silent female wars. The concubines, mostly Christian slaves captured in distant lands of Europe or bought in North African markets, arrived at the seraglio with hopes of rising in status. Their days were filled with music, embroidery, poetry, and rituals of obedience, with the illusion of catching the Sultan's eye and trading their slavery for power. Paradoxically, those young women torn from their homes had, in many ways, more options for freedom than the daughters born at the very imperial pinnacle. The so-called Sultanate of Women, between 1533 and 1656, strongly displayed the female imprint on the dynasty's destiny. Women like Kosum Sultan or Turan Hatice Sultan managed to hold the reins of politics, guiding councils, deciding wars, and writing chapters of Ottoman history with a firm hand. However, while they rose as figures of power, the princesses of royal blood remained trapped in a darker labyrinth. They were pieces on a diplomatic chessboard, human currency that sealed pacts, curbed rebellions, or ensured the loyalty of powerful pashas. It was in this context that Princess Fatma Sultan was born in the year 1606, the fruit of the union between Sultan Ahmed I and the feared Kusum, that woman capable of ruling in the shadows as if she were emperor. Fatma grew up among perfume gardens and astronomy lessons, among Arabic and Persian manuscripts, among scholars who praised her intelligence and chroniclers who admired her beauty. But neither her knowledge nor her talent, nor her mother's protection could save her from a destiny written from the cradle, to be given in marriage as a guarantee of power and obedience. The man chosen for such a union was Damat Kara Mustafa Pasha, a battle-hardened commander 20 years her senior, whose loyalty to the throne had been forged in campaigns against Persia. There was no love, no choice, not even compassion, only the cold logic of imperial politics. For him, the marriage was a ladder to more power. For her, the beginning of a tragedy. From her early years, Fatma Sultan had been an exceptional child. She spoke 4 languages fluently, mastered Arabic and Persian calligraphy with the elegance of a poet, and showed an insatiable hunger to understand the mysteries of the stars. The palace scholars considered her a prodigy, capable of debating with wise men on matters of history, law, and geography. That intelligence, however, would soon reveal itself as a useless treasure in the face of the destiny that waited in silence behind the walls of the Seraglio. Her life did not belong to her. From the moment of her birth, her future had been written on invisible parchments. She would be given in marriage to seal alliances, regardless of her will. And so the decision fell upon Kara Mustafa Pasha, a war commander hardened by campaigns against Persia, 20 years her senior. The union was not forged in the fire of affection, but in the cold calculation of power. He sought promotion and consolidation. She, barely a teenager, found herself turned into a sacrificial piece on the imperial board. 3 months before the wedding began, the dreaded preparation process known as Terbiyeh in Mubarak, the so-called sacred education. This ritual, reserved only for princesses, had no parallel in any other culture of the time. It was the refined product of centuries of psychological control practices designed to break the pride of royal blood and transform it into flawless obedience. The woman in charge of conducting the training was Gulnar Hatun, an old woman of 60 winters, head of the harem, and witness to the preparation of over a dozen princesses. Under her iron watch, Fatma was led to the Gelin Odessa, the bride's chamber, a room adorned with Persian rugs and ebony panels, where every detail evoked submission and destiny. There, from dawn until noon, she was forced to practice rituals of reverence. She had to master 18 different forms of bowing, postures designed to greet, to serve, to lie down, and to prepare herself in silence for her husband's arrival. Walking itself became a discipline. Fatma learned the Yurush and the Sechium, precisely measured steps, head tilted at a 30-degree angle, hands controlled so as never to rise above the heart. Every movement nullified her former princely dignity and molded her into a docile, submissive figure. Speech, however, was the cruelest torment. Her vocabulary was reduced to a mere 43 authorized words, expressions of gratitude, acceptance, humble pleading, or apology. Any deviation, any attempt to express free thought was punished with forced fasting, confinement in reflection cells, or public humiliation. The princess had to be examined before a tribunal of women and eunuchs, presided over by Kosem herself, who judged her obedience as if it were currency in a market. And there still remained the most disturbing aspect, the rehearsals for the first night, called Talim and Gerdek. In underground chambers of the palace, exact replicas of bridal suites were erected, where the princess had to face wax mannequins, anatomical figures commissioned from Venetian artisans. There, under the gaze of severe female instructors, Fatma was forced to rehearse gestures and acts that no young woman her age should know. Every reaction was noted in coded registers, her fear, her tears, her resistance, and every sign of rejection condemned her to more sessions, more pain, more conditioning. Thus, little by little, the young woman who had loved the starry skies was transformed into a docile body, a tame spirit, a prisoner of a ritual that stripped her of her identity. Princess Fatma was no longer the daughter of emperors, but an apprentice of submission. The training process did not stop at postures, walking, or imposed silence. Fatma Sultan was subjected to a set of trials that sought to break not only her body, but also her spirit. Any gesture of resistance, a haughty look, an out-of-place sigh, was severely punished. The punishment could be a prolonged fast to the point of exhaustion, confinement in damp cells called reflection rooms, or the humiliating repetition of rituals in front of the entire female court, as if she were a disobedient slave. Alongside physical control, a mental purification program was added. Fatma had to memorize dozens of verses extracted from Ottoman and Persian treatises on marital obedience, recited aloud before concubines and eunuchs acting as judges. Texts from al-Ghazali's Nasihat al-Muluk and fragments of the Akhlaqi Mohsini were forced upon her, with words that exalted submission, sacrifice, and marital obedience as supreme virtues. The young princess, who previously recited poems of love and astronomy, now repeated in a muted voice verses that nullified her will. Prayer became another invisible chain. 5 times a day at strictly marked times, Fatma had to pray special prayers created by the empire's ulamas. They were not pleas of free faith, but prayers composed for a single purpose: to erase the princess's individuality and glorify absolute surrender to her husband. Her prayer postures mixed religious devotion with gestures of marital submission, turning the sacred into an instrument of control. But the humiliations did not end there. Twice a week, before the entire female court, Fatma had to personally serve her own father's favorite concubines. She washed them, combed their hair, fed them with her own hands, and even dressed them for their intimate encounters with the Sultan. This cruel ceremony sought to break the last bastion of pride in the princess, forcing her to accept that even her father's lovers had a right to her service. Witnesses noted that, on more than one occasion, Fatma broke into uncontrollable tears, sobbing as she adjusted the garments of those women destined to share the imperial bedchamber. A week before the wedding, the regime became even more severe. The princess was moved to the Gelin Kushku, the bride's pavilion, an isolated enclosure where no outside sound could penetrate. There, every aspect of her life was meticulously controlled. From the food she ate, pomegranates, honey, almonds, goat's milk, Yemeni spices, to the way she had to bathe. Daily baths were carried out under the supervision of purification specialists, using oils scented with valerian, poppy, and orange blossom. These elixirs, prepared by alchemists trained in Cordoba and Samarkand, contained secret substances capable of inducing calm, docility, and in some cases, a feeling of abandoning the self. The walls of the pavilion were covered with tapestries that narrated, with silk threads, scenes of exemplary wives from Islamic and Ottoman tradition. Obedient, fertile, and submissive women promised heavenly rewards. And as if visual suggestion were not enough, strategically placed Venetian mirrors forced Fatma to constantly observe herself during her exercises, as if she were being watched by her own eyes. This practice, known as muraqaba, was originally a mystical Sufi exercise, but here it became a psychological weapon to force the princess to police herself, even in her most intimate thoughts. In this confinement, Fatma began to understand that she was no longer the master of her life. Her body, her voice, and even her thoughts had been molded into tools of obedience. The preparation had achieved what it intended, not only to tame the princess, but to erase the curious and intelligent young woman who had dreamed of the firmament. The appointed day arrived on March 15, 1623. From dawn, Istanbul vibrated like an overflowing heart. The streets were filled with processions, music, and incense, while banquets were served on gold tableware in the halls of Topkapi. There were dances brought from Persia and Andalusia, songs by the best musicians of the empire, and competitions among janissaries showing their skill before the Sultan's eyes. The splendor was such that, to the people, it seemed like a tribute to the heavens. But for the young princess, it was the prelude to a condemnation. Chroniclers relate that while the guests celebrated amidst laughter and wine, Fatma remained silent, with dry lips and a distant gaze. The palace doctors, attentive to every gesture, recorded symptoms that today we would call panic attacks. Tremors, cold sweat despite the cool March weather, a total lack of appetite, and episodes of shortness of breath that made them fear for her life. The public splendor contrasted with an intimate terror that grew like a shadow inside her. When the last cup was raised and the civilian guests left the palace, the most dreaded procession began. Fatma was escorted to the bridal pavilion, a structure erected in the private gardens following ancestral plans dating back to the time of Mehmed II. It was an octagonal building divided into 3 levels, each destined for a rite: purification, surrender, and consummation. That architecture was no accident. Every corner had been designed to reinforce the princess's vulnerability and turn the ceremony into an act of total submission. The first level, called Taha Khatu, was dedicated to purification. There, the young woman was subjected to ritual baths that lasted for hours on end. Carrara marble, waters perfumed with damask rose essences, Shiraz jasmine, Mysore sandalwood, and Somali ambergris enveloped her skin. The alchemists applied ointments made with diluted opium, mandrake extract, and secret substances that induced calm and surrender. The doctors described the resulting state as an ecstasy of submission, where the body surrendered even if the soul screamed in silence. The second level, Teslim Khatu, was the floor of surrender. There, Fatma was dressed in bridal attire woven in white silk, adorned with gold threads and pearls from the Persian Gulf. At first glance, it looked like a regal gown. In reality, it was designed with hidden clasps and internal cords that facilitated the immobilization of the body. The crown weighed enough to limit her movements. The anklets and bracelets discreetly restricted her freedom, and the thick-soled footwear prevented her from fleeing. The garment was, in itself, a prison embroidered in luxury. While Fatma was transformed into a symbol of submission, her future husband, Kara Mustafa Pasha, participated in very different ceremonies. Surrounded by advisors and war veterans, he received instructions on how to psychologically impose himself on an imperial princess. Methods of intimidation, calculated phrases to humiliate, techniques of physical domination. Everything was arranged to ensure that, in that union, there was no room for doubt or resistance. Finally came the ascent to the third level, the Sifaf Khatu, the Chamber of Consummation. Its walls were covered with tapestries showing military conquests, subjugated cities, captive princesses, defeated armies. The iconography was not accidental. It established a parallel between victory in war and victory in bed. The furniture, made by artisans expert in bodily control, included beds with hidden cordage systems, cushions impregnated with calming oils, and dim lights that turned the space into a stage designed to break the will. It was there, in that room loaded with symbols, that Fatma faced the most dreaded night. The young woman, barely sustained by her shallow breathing, became the living pledge of a political pact. And although official chronicles narrated the wedding as a triumph for the dynasty, in the silence of that room a tragedy was brewing that would scar her soul forever. When the door of the Sif of Khatu closed behind the procession, Fatma was left alone with her husband. Medical documents from the time describe what happened in those hours as an absolute collapse of the spirit. The young woman, who until then had endured months of discipline and humiliation, lost all capacity for a coherent response. Her body trembled uncontrollably, her voice became a barely audible murmur, and her eyes wandered as if looking at an invisible world. Imperial doctors would later call this state Soksmai Tam, total shock. Kara Mustafa Pasha, a man forged in battles and the conquest of fortresses, was instructed to impose his authority. At first he interpreted the princess's reaction as willful resistance, an arrogance that had to be broken with harshness. He applied the techniques his advisors had taught him: words of intimidation, gestures of power, calculated physical contact. But what he found was not rebellion, but the complete collapse of a young soul. There was no fight to win, but an absence, a void. Fatma was no longer there. Her mind had taken refuge in a profound dissociation, as if she had abandoned her body to survive. The consummation of that marriage, when it finally occurred after hours of failed attempts, was recorded by hidden observers as a traumatic event for both of them. Writings in Persian cipher describe internal hemorrhaging, recurrent loss of consciousness, and what doctors called ruh chukmek, the departure of the soul. From that night on, Fatma was never the same again. In the following days, her behavior alarmed even the most severe instructors of the harem. She developed selective mutism. She spoke only in whispers and only when asked direct questions. Her appetite disappeared completely to the point of requiring forced feeding. Crying episodes began for no apparent reason and could last for hours. Worse still, what chroniclers called the disease of fear emerged. The mere presence of a man, even trusted eunuchs, was enough to send the princess into a panic. Rapid breathing, extreme sweating, sudden fainting. Court doctors diagnosed what they called virginal melancholy. According to their treatises, it was a common condition among princesses after their first marital night. In modern terms, we could speak of an irreversible trauma, a wound in the psyche impossible to heal with simple remedies. Treatments with herbs, music, and Sufi spiritual exercises were attempted, but none restored Fatma's former vitality. The brilliant young woman who debated with scholars, the curious girl who loved astronomy and poetry, disappeared forever. In her place remained a dull, obedient, absent figure. Her books remained closed, her musical instruments covered in dust, and the gardens she once joyfully roamed were abandoned. She who had been born the daughter of the most powerful sultan was now barely a present body, a specter of what she could have been. The marriage to Kara Mustafa Pasha transformed into a mechanical coexistence. There were children, there were public events, there was an appearance of normality, but in private, silence and distance reigned. The Pasha himself, as recounted in later memoirs, took refuge in military campaigns and opium, trying to silence the guilt of having been the instrument of a ritual that destroyed the princess. Fatma lived 29 more years after that night, reduced to a ceremonial ornament, a forced mother, and a voiceless wife. Her death in 1652, officially attributed to brain fever, coincided with her wedding anniversary. For many in the court, it was no coincidence. On that day, the weight of the memory finally closed over her soul. The case of Fatma Sultan was not an exception, but a mirror of a pattern repeated over generations. Palace archives, rescued centuries later from dust and silence, reveal that dozens of Ottoman princesses suffered similar fates. Some were marked by mutism, others tried to escape through suicide or madness, and a few disappeared from official records as if they had never existed. The machinery of the empire, so precise in its protocols, knew how to erase uncomfortable traces and cloak them in euphemisms in carefully drafted chronicles. Recently translated documents speak of princesses who went as far as faking their own deaths to flee a second marriage, of others who invented secret codes to communicate with sisters reduced to silence, and of some who, with unprecedented courage, even went so far as to request a divorce directly from the Sultan, defying a system that seemed unbreakable. These stories, buried for centuries in basements and forbidden archives, show us that even in the thickest darkness, there were always flashes of female resistance. The tragedy of Fatma, and of so many like her, lays bare an uncomfortable truth. Absolute power does not always protect those who embody it, but can turn them into the first victims of their own greatness. While the outside world imagined Ottoman princesses surrounded by luxury and power, the reality was an invisible chain of submission, designed with the precision of an imperial mechanism that sacrificed lives to maintain alliances and structures. Today, looking back, we understand that the imperial harem was not only a stage of intrigues and silks, but also a theater of imposed silences and stifled tears. What we were told as princess tales was, in truth, a political construct that devoured the Sultan's own daughters. And then the inevitable question arises: how many other secrets still remain hidden in the archives of ancient palaces, waiting to be discovered? What dark rituals did the European, Russian, or Chinese courts hide? What was the true price paid by the women destined to uphold the greatness of their dynasties? If Fatma's story has shaken you, do not hesitate to join us in the upcoming revelations. Subscribe, share this tale with those who deserve to know the truth behind the fairy tales, and leave in the comments the name of the queen or princess whose fate you wish to be unveiled. Perhaps it will be a Russian Serena feared by her own mother, a Chinese empress subjected to macabre rituals, or a daughter of European kings handed over as a token of alliance. Because only by knowing these hidden truths will we be able to strip history of its disguise and finally hear the drowned-out voices of those who were sacrificed in the name of power.